The town of Redemption Creek had seen its share of trouble, but nothing prepared the townsfolk for the moment a young woman, dust-covered, bruised, and bound by a traitor's rope, lifted her eyes and stared straight into the soul of a man who wanted no part of anybody's problems. That man was Jonathan Hale. He didn't know it yet, but that single glance would tear apart the life he'd built, reshape the town around him, and test the strength of a woman who'd been silenced by the world, yet still refused to break. Jonathan had come to the monthly livestock market for one reason: to buy a new mare. Instead, he found himself standing before a sight he could not walk away from. The Texas sun burned hot on his neck as he pushed through a crowd gathered near the back end of the auction yard. But folks weren't packed shoulder to shoulder the way they were around prime cattle. This cluster felt different, tense, uneasy, whispering like they were waiting for something they couldn't quite name. Then he saw her, a young woman, barefoot, bruised, wrists tied like livestock, stood beside a trader known for selling everything a decent man wouldn't touch. Dust clung to her skin. A torn blue dress hung off one shoulder, but nothing about those bruises or that rope struck Jonathan harder than her eyes. Dark brown, bright with awareness, and burning with a strength he recognized from wild horses he'd tried and failed to break. The trader barked out a laugh. "Perfect for chores. Don't speak, don't hear, don't complain. Man's peace and quiet. Right here for $50. Soft engagement line. If you're listening, friends, stay with me. Because what happens next changed not only Jonathan's life, but the destiny of everyone in Redemption Creek. Jonathan should have walked away. A man with his past, a soldier scarred by war, a rancher worn thin by hard years, knew trouble when he saw it. But when the girl lifted her head, just for a heartbeat, her gaze locked onto his, and something shifted. Not fear, not begging. Strength. Strength so quiet and steady, it made the hair rise on the back of his neck. Before he knew what he was doing, Jonathan stepped forward and said the words that would alter everything. "I'll take her." The crowd turned as if he'd grown horns. Men shook their heads. Some laughed. Others muttered he'd lost what little sense he had. But Jonathan didn't hear them. His eyes stayed on the girl. Clara rose. The trader had called her as he cut the rope from her wrists. She flinched at the knife, then surprised him by nodding once, slow and calm, like she understood he meant no harm. He pointed toward his wagon. She followed with silent, careful steps. As they rolled out of town, the weight of what he'd done settled on his shoulders. He spoke, even though she couldn't hear him, partly out of habit, and partly to ease the tightness in his chest. "Long ride ahead," he said quietly. "Hope you're up for it." She didn't answer, but when he glanced back, she was watching him, studying every shift of the reins, every tremor in the horse's steps, every flicker of the sky. 2 hours later, the world changed again. The wind dropped. The sky took on a strange yellow-brown glare. His horses began to toss their heads, sensing trouble in ways men often missed. A sandstorm, a deadly one. Jonathan scanned the horizon for shelter, saw nothing but open land, and felt panic rise for the first time in years. Then he felt a tug on his sleeve. Clara Rose was standing beside him, pointing, not east toward the visible hills, but southwest toward an empty stretch of land. He shook his head. "There's nothing there." But she kept insisting, her gestures sharp, urgent, certain. "Trust me." He felt it more than saw it. Another gust hit, carrying dust sharp enough to sting his eyes. In minutes, the storm would swallow them whole. Jonathan snapped the reins and turned the wagon the way she'd shown. And there it was, a narrow hidden canyon, invisible from a distance, carved deep by some long dry river, a natural refuge. And he pulled the horses down the steep incline just as the storm roared in behind them. Wind screamed across the open world, but inside the canyon, the air calmed. The overhang shielded them as Jonathan tore into action, securing the horses, the supplies, the wagon. Clara worked beside him without hesitation, calm, efficient, steady as any ranch hand he'd ever hired. When he draped his coat over her to shield her from the swirling dust, she paused and looked up at him. Her eyes softened, just for a second, just long enough for him to feel something shift in his chest. As the storm howled overhead, they huddled against the rock wall, two strangers with nothing in common except the strange pull that had drawn them through danger and into shelter together. And as night settled over the canyon, Jonathan Hale realized two things. This girl was not helpless, and nothing about her was what it seemed. Stay with me, because what happens next will test every ounce of strength in both their hearts. The storm passed hours later, leaving the canyon floor coated in red dust and the night air cold enough to bite through cloth. Jonathan rose first, brushing dirt from his coat, before turning to check on the girl who had saved their lives. Clara Rose sat a short distance away, knees pulled close, her fingers pressed lightly to the ground as if she were listening to something he could not hear. For a moment, he simply watched her, watched the slow rise and fall of her breath, the way her gaze stayed alert, even in exhaustion. He approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. "You knew this place was here," he said softly. A warmth through him, an odd sense of trust warmed through him, an odd sense of trust forming far faster than he expected. A man like Jonathan didn't invite people into his world easily. Yet this girl, this stranger, had already altered the shape of it. He gestured toward the small fire he'd coaxed to life. She rose and walked toward it, sitting with her hands open to the heat. The light revealed details he hadn't noticed before, delicate features beneath the dust, a bruise fading along her jaw, and the steady, unbroken strength in her eyes. When he passed her a tin cup of warm water, she accepted it with both hands and bowed her head in quiet thanks. Jonathan exhaled, settling onto the dirt across from her. "You're safe here," he said slowly, letting each word shape clearly on his lips. "No one's going to hurt you." Her gaze softened, and then she did something unexpected. She pointed to his chest, to the old war scar hidden beneath his shirt, then traced a slow line downward, asking without words where the pain lived in him. Jonathan froze. He hadn't spoken of that wound in years, the one that burned whenever storms rolled in, the one that reminded him of battles he'd rather forget. But somehow, she sensed it. "It's old," he said with a faint smile. "Still aches now and then." She nodded again, a knowing look crossing her face as if she'd carried more than enough pain of her own. Silence settled between them, gentle, not heavy. Then she lifted her hand, pointed to herself, mouthed slowly, "Clara." Her name. Jonathan felt something shift again. "Jonathan," he said, pointing to his own chest. Clara repeated it without sound. Her lips formed his name with surprising clarity, and it struck him deep, like hearing hope in a place he'd thought long empty. They stayed awake into the night, the fire flickering low as both tried to understand the strange ease forming between them. But exhaustion soon pulled them apart. Jonathan insisted she take his bedroll, gesturing firmly until she relented. He'd slept on worse ground before. When dawn broke, they climbed from the canyon and continued toward the Double H Ranch. As the first glimpse of home appeared over the ridge, a modest adobe house, a weathered barn, the spread of fenced pasture, Clara leaned forward slightly, watching every detail with quiet wonder. "This is it," Jonathan said, guiding the horses through the gate. "Ain't fancy, but it holds." Clara stepped down before the wagon fully stopped. She walked toward the corral, where 3 horses grazed lazily in the morning sun. The animals lifted their heads, ears pricked toward her. Jonathan watched in disbelief as Liberty, his most skittish mare, walked straight to Clara and pressed her nose gently to the girl's open palm. Clara closed her eyes. Her shoulders relaxed, like she was hearing something no one else could. Jonathan approached slowly. She usually don't take to strangers." Clara opened her eyes and pointed to Liberty's right foreleg. She mimed pain, inflamed, hidden. Jonathan frowned. He stepped into the corral and checked the mare's leg. Heat, swelling. He never would have noticed for another day or 2. "That's something," he murmured, struggling for words. Clara was already heading to the barn, searching shelves for ointments and bandages. Within minutes, she mixed herbs, salve, and water into a paste and applied it to Liberty's leg with gentle, practiced hands. Jonathan stood behind her, stunned. "You've done this before," he said. Clara touched her chest, pointed to the land, then traced a tiny cradle in the air. A child raised around horses. He nodded slowly. It made sense. As days passed, Clara settled into life on the ranch with surprising ease. It began to happen. Chickens that usually began to happen. Chickens that usually scattered now gathered around her feet. Cats that tolerated no one curled in her lap. Grant, the stallion who kicked anything that breathed, lowered his head so she could stroke his nose. The ranch grew quieter, steadier, as if the land itself breathed easier with her on it. Jonathan wasn't sure what to make of her, but every evening, when she returned to the house with dust on her dress and that calm strength in her gaze, he felt something inside him loosen, something he'd locked away for too many years. One night, as he sat on the porch repairing a worn leather harness, he heard a sound that froze him. A hum. Soft, low, melodic. He stood quietly and stepped toward the barn. There she was, Clara, brushing Liberty's coat as she hummed a wordless tune. The mare stood still, eyes half closed, completely relaxed under the girl's touch. "You can make sound," he said without thinking. Clara spun, startled, fear flashing across her face. She touched her throat, shook her head violently, backing away. No, I'm not angry," Jonathan said quickly, hands raised in peace. "Just surprised." But she wouldn't meet his eyes. She climbed the ladder to the hayloft and curled into herself, trembling like a wounded animal expecting a blow. Jonathan climbed the first rung, then stopped, speaking gently so she could read his lips. "I don't care what that traitor said. I don't care what anyone else thinks. You're safe here. You're whatever you can or can't do. It doesn't matter." Clara's shoulders shook. For a long moment she stayed silent. Then she climbed down just enough to kneel before him. She took his hand, placed it on her throat, and tried to speak. What came out was broken, painful, more breath than sound. She tried again, and again, until tears filled her eyes. Finally, she signed one word: broken. Jonathan's heart twisted. "Not to me," he whispered. "Never to me." But the world outside the ranch was not so gentle, and trouble came sooner than either expected. The first sign of trouble came as a whisper, one Jonathan felt more than heard. A shift in the air, a stillness that didn't belong. Animals lifting their heads in unison, as if listening to something far beyond human hearing. Clara stood in the barn doorway. What is it? She touched the ground with her hand. I'm not sure. I think it's a warning. A warning? Yes, I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's a warning. I'm not sure what it means, but I think it's... What is it? She touched the ground with her palm, then cupped her hand to her chest. Danger. Coming fast. Jonathan grabbed his coat and rifle. They rode into town that Sunday for supplies, just a routine trip. But Redemption Creek had always been a place where fear traveled faster than truth, and fear had outrun them. When Jonathan turned the corner near the churchyard, he saw a crowd tightening like a noose around Clara Rose, her back pressed against the fence, voices rising, faces twisted with suspicion. "Witchcraft!" someone shouted. "She healed my boy too fast," cried another. Animals follow her like she's got the devil's hand." Clara stood still, chin high, her eyes steady, even as hands pointed. Voices turned cruel, and the weight of superstition fell upon her like stones. Jonathan shoved through the crowd. "That's enough." His voice cut sharp and cold, but the mob surged, their fear wrapped in scripture, tradition, and the bitterness of not understanding what they refused to learn. Then Clara did something simple, something misunderstood. She lifted her hands to sign. Peace. Calm. Listen. The crowd recoiled. "She's spellcasting!" Bodies pressed forward. Jonathan grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her behind him. He could feel her shaking, but she refused to cower. That quiet strength, the same strength he'd seen in her the first day, blazed in her eyes. And then, horses screamed, and every horse tied along Main Street reared in unison. Every hoof struck the ground at the same instant. Every creature lifted its head and cried out. Chaos shattered the mob. People scrambled, scattering like leaves in a hard wind. Jonathan seized the moment, lifting Clara onto the wagon and snapping the reins hard. Thunder and lightning bolted through the street, dust spiraling behind them as Redemption Creek shrank into distance. The storm that followed wasn't made of wind or dust. It was made of people, fearful, wounded, angry, and they carried that storm straight to the Double H Ranch. 3 days later, riders appeared on the ridge. 6 at first, then 12, watching, measuring, judging. Clara grew quieter with each visit. She still worked with the animals, still healed, still soothed, and still moved through the ranch as if she belonged to every breath of wind. But her eyes kept slipping toward the horizon. She was preparing to be hunted again. One night, she moved her bedding from the barn to a small storage room in the house. Jonathan didn't ask why. He could see the answer in her trembling hands. Then came the fire. Jonathan woke, choking on smoke. Flames devoured the barn roof. Animals screamed. Clara was already outside, barefoot, battling the blaze with a bucket, as if she'd die before letting another creature suffer. They saved the horses. They saved the cats. They saved each other. But half the barn collapsed, and on one surviving beam, burned deep into the wood. Send away the witch, or burn with her. Clara read it. Her shoulders sagged, not in defeat, but in sorrow. She touched Jonathan's hand. I must leave. For your sake. No, he whispered, voice breaking. You're my home now. Her eyes filled, her signs trembled. Already lost everything because of me. Don't let them take you, too. I don't lose what I'm meant to keep, he said, pulling her into him. And you, Clara, I keep. The next morning, riders returned. But this time, they weren't enemies. Miguel Cervantes, Sarah Nightingale, old Joseph Beethoven. Families Clara had helped. Children she had healed. Neighbors she had protected quietly for months. We're here to stand with her, Dr. Hamilton said. All of us. Hope flickered in Clara's eyes. Small, fragile, beautiful. But fear wasn't done with them yet. The final storm arrived near sunset. 30 mounted men, armed, organized, led by Thomas Roosevelt himself. They surrounded the ranch like wolves circling prey. Roosevelt's voice thundered across the yard. Jonathan Hale, surrender the girl. She stands accused of witchcraft, manipulation, unnatural works. This valley won't rest until she's gone. Jonathan stepped forward, rifle in hand, but barrel low. You'll come through me first. Miguel joined him. Dr. Hamilton, Sarah, even old Joseph. A circle formed around Clara, a shield made not of guns, but of people whose lives she had touched. Roosevelt sneered. She twists your minds. She corrupts your hearts. Then, something changed. Clara stepped from behind Jonathan. Slow, steady, brave. She held her hands up in silence. Roosevelt spat. Here, look! She casts her wicked signs. But Clara wasn't casting anything. She was communicating. Truth, compassion, understanding. Dr. Hamilton translated her signs aloud, each word clear as daylight. I mean no harm. Fear has caused enough pain. Let me show you what I am, not what you fear. She turned toward the corral and began to hum. The sound, soft, pure, trembling with the strength she still carried, despite every bruise the world had left, rippled across the yard. The horses lifted their heads, every one of them. Then, in perfect unison, they knelt. Even Roosevelt's horse dropped to its knees, throwing the man into the dirt. Silence swallowed the valley, a sacred kind of silence, the kind that settles before the truth rises. Clara walked to Roosevelt, her step soft as wind through grass. She studied him, not with anger. Feel the pain you carry, But hurting feel the pain you carry, but hurting others will not heal what you lost. Roosevelt trembled. No, you don't. Clara lowered herself beside him and placed her hand gently over his heart. He broke. The man who had hunted her, feared her, hated her, sobbed like a grieving father finally seeing the truth in daylight. When he rose, he wasn't an enemy anymore. He rode away quietly. His men followed. The storm broke and drifted off into the hills. Clara sagged, exhausted. Jonathan caught her before she fell. "You're stronger than a Mustang," he whispered into her hair. Words he'd kept inside for months. She didn't hear the sound, but she felt his voice, his breath. The ranch grew quieter, warmer, fuller. The ranch grew quieter, warmer, fuller, with life. And one night, beneath the lantern glow of the rebuilt barn, Jonathan kissed her for the very first time. A slow, trembling kiss. A healing kiss. The kiss of a man who'd found something worth protecting with his life. Clara responded not with words, but with a hand over his heart, and another over her own, matching their rhythms together. 2 beats, 1 life. She looked up at him with eyes bright as morning, and mouthed very slowly, "Home." Jonathan pulled her close. "Always," he whispered. And at that moment, the world outside the barn, the fear, the storms, the suspicions, fell away like dust on the wind. For tonight, they had peace. They had each other. They had a future born from courage, kindness, and a strength far greater than any Mustang running wild under the Texas sun.